The air in the Shadow Realm bar was electric, a charged hum of magic that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the dim, multicolored lights. Argoz stepped cautiously into the space, her eyes darting across the vast, otherworldly room. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen. High, arched ceilings adorned with glowing runes, stone walls that seemed to breathe, and a floor shimmering with shifting patterns that felt alive. The patrons were just as strange. Towering trolls, ethereal spirits and other supernatural beings mingled freely, their true forms unveiled in this space of truce. Argoz tightened her grip on the celestial gem, its glow muted beneath her cloak. "Welcome to the Shadow Realm bar," Evelyn said, her voice smooth. "Try not to look too impressed." "I'm not impressed," Argoz muttered, but her wide eyes betrayed her. Caleb smirked. "Just don't touch anything or anyone, and you'll be fine." They moved through the room, weaving between groups of beings engaged in hushed conversations or watching the swirling patterns on the walls. Argos's gaze was drawn to the long bar counter, where bartenders poured drinks that fizzed and glowed with an almost hypnotic allure. "Who's the goblin?" a smooth, cutting voice called from the shadows. Argoz turned sharply, her instincts kicking in as she scanned the room for the source. From a booth near the bar, a figure rose, moving with a predator's grace. She was tall and slender, her raven-black hair cascading over her shoulders, framing a face that was both beautiful and dangerous. Her dark eyes gleamed with intensity, and a faint smirk played on her lips. "Rose," Evelyn said, her tone a mix of amusement and caution. "Of course you'd find us." "You make it sound like it was a challenge," Rose replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Her gaze flicked to Argoz, sharp and probing. "And who's this? Another one of your strays?" Argoz bristled, her fingers brushing the hilt of her dagger beneath her cloak. "I'm not a stray." Rose's smirk widened, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Oh, she talks. And feisty too. I like her." "She's with me," Evelyn said firmly, stepping between Rose and Argoz. "And she's off limits." "Relax, darling." Rose waved a hand dismissively, but her focus didn't waver from Argoz. "I'm just curious. It's not every day someone new waltzes in here with something that hums like that." She gestured faintly toward the gem, her tone casual but her meaning razor-sharp. Argoz's hand tightened around the gem instinctively. "What do you mean?" Rose tilted her head, her smirk growing. "Oh, sweetheart, you're practically glowing. Whatever you're carrying, it's singing loud enough to turn heads. And not just mine." "Leave it alone, Rose," Caleb said, his voice low and warning. Rose arched an eyebrow at him, a flicker of amusement crossing her face. "Since when are you the protective type, Caleb? I thought your thing was staying out of trouble." Caleb shrugged. "And I thought your thing was knowing when to back off." For a moment, the tension in the room thickened. Then Rose laughed, a melodic sound that carried an edge. "Fair enough. I'll behave. For now." Rose moved closer, her piercing gaze locking onto Argoz. "So, Goblin, what brings you to my little slice of heaven? A drink? A deal? Or are you just sightseeing?" Argoz hesitated, unsure how to navigate this conversation. Rose's presence was magnetic and unnerving, a mix of charm and danger that set her on edge. "I'm just passing through." Rose chuckled, her dark eyes gleaming. "Passing through. Oh, darling, no one just passes through the Shadow Realm bar. You're here for a reason. And if you don't know what that is yet, you'd better figure it out fast." "Maybe I don't want to," Argos shot back, her voice sharper than she intended. Rose's smirk didn't falter. "Oh, I like you," she said, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. "Spunky, clueless, and carrying enough magic to light up half the room. You'll fit in just fine." "Enough," Evelyn said, her tone cutting through the tension. "Rose, we don't have time for your games." "Games?" Rose feigned a look of mock offense, placing a hand over her chest. "Evelyn, you wound me. I'm simply welcoming our new friend." She turned back to Argos, her expression softening slightly, though the glint of mischief remained. Word of advice, Goblin. Watch your back. This place might have rules, but rules only work when everyone follows them. And trust me, not everyone does. As Rose stepped away, she paused, her gaze lingering on the gem beneath Argos's cloak. Whatever you're carrying, keep it close, and keep it quiet. There are eyes everywhere, and not all of them are friendly. With that, she sauntered back to her booth, her laughter trailing behind her like a whisper. Evelyn exhaled sharply, shaking her head. She's trouble, Caleb muttered. She's the queen of trouble, Evelyn corrected. But she's not wrong. You need to be careful, Argoz. Argoz glanced between the two of them, her mind racing. The encounter had left her rattled, but there was something about Rose that intrigued her. She was dangerous, yes, but also sharp, confident, and undeniably in control. For now, Argoz decided to keep her head down and her guard up. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of her dealings with the so-called queen of the bar. The Shadow Realm. Bar pulsed with its usual energy, a swirl of supernatural beings, muted lights, and the faint hum of magic. Argoz's sharp eyes darted across the room as she followed Caleb and Evelyn through the crowd, trying to take it all in without gawking. Evelyn! Caleb! The smooth, familiar voice rang out like silk laced with steel. All three turned to see Rose lounging in her booth, her dark eyes gleaming with amusement. She gestured casually toward them with a slight tilt of her diamond-ringed hand. Why don't you bring your little friend over? Drinks are on me tonight. Caleb froze, narrowing his eyes. What's the catch, Rose? Rose placed a hand over her chest in mock offense. Catch? Can't a queen be generous every once in a while? You don't do generous, Evelyn said flatly. But she was already moving toward the booth, clearly unwilling to risk escalating whatever game Rose was playing. Caleb hesitated but followed, and after a brief moment of indecision, Argoz trailed behind. The booth was as luxurious as it could get in the Shadow Realm bar, tucked into a dark corner with plush, mismatched cushions that somehow managed to look expensive. A fresh round of drinks sat waiting, 2 glowing potions and a more mundane whiskey. Please sit, Rose purred, gesturing to the seats across from her. She lifted her glass, the crystal catching the light with a deliberate sparkle, and took a slow sip. You look like you could all use a drink. Argoz slid into the booth hesitantly, flanked by Caleb and Evelyn. Her sharp eyes caught the way Rose's diamond ring gleamed as she toyed with her glass, the light refracting into tiny rainbows across the table. So, Rose began, leaning back and fixing her gaze on Argoz. You must be the one making all the noise. It's not every day something as shiny as you walks into my bar. I'm not shiny, Argoz snapped before she could stop herself. Rose's smirk widened. Oh, but you are. And not just that little trinket you're hiding. She tapped her own chest lightly, as if sensing the celestial gem's faint hum. You've got a glow about you, darling. Makes me wonder what kind of trouble you've brought with you. Argoz stiffened, her hand instinctively brushing the gem beneath her cloak. Caleb placed a firm hand on her shoulder. Leave it, Rose. Leave it? Rose echoed, her tone dripping with mock indignation. I'm being hospitable. Bought you drinks, didn't I? She turned her attention back to Argoz, her dark eyes glinting with amusement. Tell me, Goblin, what's your drink of choice? A little something sweet? Or do you prefer something that burns? Argoz glared at her. I don't drink. Pity, Rose said with a faint shrug. But that's all right. You can still enjoy the company. As the conversation drifted, Rose leaned forward, propping her chin on her hand. She twisted the diamond ring on her finger, turning it slowly so the light refracted and scattered in dazzling bursts. Argoz's sharp yellow eyes flicked to the ring despite herself, her fingers twitching beneath the table. Something wrong? Rose asked, feigning innocence. You seem distracted. I'm not, Argoz said sharply, her jaw tightening. Rose chuckled, her gaze never leaving Argoz. Oh, darling, you're terrible at lying. It's endearing, really. That's enough, Evelyn cut in, her voice edged with warning. She's new. Stop playing games. Games? Rose's smirk turned razor sharp. This isn't a game, Evelyn. I'm just getting to know her. Before Evelyn could respond, Rose reached into her pouch and pulled out a small golden coin. The intricate patterns etched across its surface caught the light, gleaming temptingly. She turned it over in her fingers with deliberate care before sliding it across the table to Argoz. Here, Rose said, her tone almost gentle. A little something to remember me by. Consider it a token of friendship. Argoz stared at the coin, her instincts screaming at her. It was small, insignificant compared to the treasures she'd hoarded back in Mirkdusk, but it sparkled in a way that made her fingers itch. Don't, Caleb warned, his voice low. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She's testing you. Rose tilted her head, her smirk softening into something almost playful. Testing? No, just being friendly. Isn't that what friends do? The tension hung heavy in the air as Argoz hesitated, her gaze locked on the coin. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and picked it up, her sharp claws brushing its smooth surface. Rose's smile widened as she raised her glass in a mock toast. Welcome to the Shadow Realm, darling. As they left Rose's booth, Caleb and Evelyn pulled Argoz aside. Caleb's expression was dark, his voice low. You shouldn't have taken that. She said it was a gift, Argoz said defensively, slipping the coin into her pocket. It's never just a gift with Rose, Evelyn muttered, her tone sharp. She's setting you up for something. Argoz frowned but said nothing, the weight of the coin heavy in her pocket. Deep down, she knew they were right, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just taken her first step into a game she didn't yet understand. As they left the booth, Argoz slipped the golden coin into her pocket, her thoughts churning. Caleb and Evelyn flanked her, their expressions grim. You need to be careful with her, Caleb said quietly. Rose doesn't give gifts without expecting something in return. She hasn't asked for anything, Argoz muttered, though the weight of the coin in her pocket felt heavier than it should. Not yet, Evelyn said darkly, but she will. Speaking of asking for things, Rose's smooth voice cut through their hushed conversation. The trio turned to see her standing behind them, her smirk firmly in place. That little gem you're carrying, it's practically screaming to be admired. Argoz's hand instinctively went to her cloak, where the celestial gem was hidden. I'm not showing it here, she said sharply. Of course not, Rose replied, her tone almost soothing. This isn't the place for such treasures. But I'd love a closer look. Privately. Evelyn crossed her arms, her ember-like eyes narrowing. And why would she do that? Rose tilted her head, her smirk softening into something almost sincere. Because I might be able to tell her something about it. I've seen things like it before, things with power. But if you'd rather wander around in ignorance, that's fine by me. Argoz hesitated, her instincts warring with her curiosity. Caleb and Evelyn exchanged a glance, but before they could intervene, Rose added, Silas has a perfectly good office we can use. He won't mind. Without waiting for an answer, Rose turned on her heel and began walking toward the back of the bar, her diamond ring catching the light with every step. The office was tucked away behind an unassuming door near the bar's back wall. Silas, the Shadow Realm bar's enigmatic manager, was leaning against his desk, a towering figure with a quiet, commanding presence. His silver hair caught the faint light from the glowing runes on the walls, and his piercing gaze softened slightly as Rose entered. Silas, darling, Rose said, her tone sweet. We need the office for a moment. You don't mind, do you? Silas raised an eyebrow, his gaze flicking briefly to the group behind her before returning to Rose. As long as you don't make a mess. Rose laughed, stepping close to him and brushing a kiss against his cheek. You're a gem, as always. Silas sighed, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and gestured for them to enter. Don't take too long. Rose ushered the group inside, closing the door behind them. The office was neat and well organized, its walls lined with shelves of ancient tomes and artifacts. A single sturdy desk dominated the space, and Rose motioned for Argoz to sit across from it. "Well, Goblin," Rose said, settling gracefully into the chair behind the desk. "Let's see what you've got." Reluctantly, Argoz pulled the celestial gem from beneath her cloak, its light pulsing faintly in her hand. She placed it on the desk, her sharp eyes never leaving Rose as the woman leaned forward, her expression finally serious. Rose reached out, her movements deliberate and reverent, and picked up the gem. The light within it seemed to brighten at her touch, its patterns shifting like liquid silver. "Interesting," Rose murmured, tilting the gem so the light refracted across her face. "Very interesting." "What is it?" Argoz asked, her tone edged with suspicion. Rose didn't answer immediately, her focus entirely on the gem. She turned it over in her hands, her dark eyes scanning its surface as if reading something invisible. Finally, she set it down, leaning back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. "I have a hunch," she said slowly, "but I'll need to consult a few contacts to confirm it." "What kind of hunch?" Caleb pressed, his tone wary. Rose's smirk returned, though it was tempered by something almost respectful. "Let's just say this little gem of yours is more than a pretty trinket. It has a purpose, a powerful one, but it's tied to something much larger than you, Goblin. And if I'm right, it could tip the scales of more than one realm." Argoz's stomach twisted. "You're being vague." "Because vagueness is safer for now," Rose replied smoothly. "But don't worry, darling, I'll give it back." True to her word, she slid the gem across the desk, and Argoz snatched it up, tucking it back beneath her cloak. Rose stood, her diamond ring catching the light again as she adjusted it. "I'll reach out to a few old friends. Discreetly, of course. No one will know about this unless I want them to." "Why are you helping?" Evelyn asked, her tone sharp. Rose smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let's just say I enjoy solving puzzles. And this one?" She gestured faintly to the gem. "It's one of the most intriguing I've seen in years." She stepped toward the door, pausing to glance back at Argoz. "You're lucky, Goblin. That gem of yours might just be your ticket to survival, or your death warrant. Either way, it's going to be fun to watch." With that, she opened the door, leaving them alone in the office. Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This is bad," he muttered. "It's Rose," Evelyn said. "It's always bad." Argoz didn't respond, her fingers brushing against the gem as she stared at the door. She had the answers she'd come for, but Rose's parting words lingered like a shadow, heavy and foreboding. The trio stepped out of Silas's office, the weight of the evening pressing heavily on their shoulders. Argoz kept a tight grip on the celestial gem beneath her cloak, her sharp eyes darting nervously around the bar's surreal interior. "I think we're done here," Caleb said, his voice low. "We've had enough of Rose's games for one night." Evelyn nodded in agreement. "Let's go. The sooner we're out of here, the better." Argoz didn't argue. The gem felt heavier now, as though Rose's words had awakened something inside it, something she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. Without another word, they moved toward the door, weaving through the supernatural patrons who paid them little mind. As they stepped back through the glowing doorway and into the mundane side of the bar, the contrast was jarring. The human-facing bar was dimly lit and unassuming, its creaky booths and peeling wallpaper a far cry from the grandeur of the Shadow Realm. The faint hum of magic was gone, replaced by the muted clink of glasses and murmured conversations. Caleb pushed open the front door, and the cool night air washed over them as they stepped out onto the quiet street. For a moment, the tension began to lift, until Evelyn stopped abruptly, her sharp gaze fixed on a shadowy corner of the bar's patio. "There she is," Evelyn muttered, her tone both exasperated and wary. Rose was seated at a small outdoor table, her legs crossed elegantly as she leaned back in her chair. A man sat across from her, his features obscured by the shadows, but his tense posture and quick glances toward her suggested he was far less comfortable than she was. Rose's demeanour, by contrast, was entirely at ease. She was laughing softly at something the man had said, her dark eyes glinting with amusement. As if sensing their presence, she glanced toward the trio and gave them a slow, deliberate smile. Then, as if to punctuate the moment, she raised her hand in a casual wave, the diamond on her finger catching the streetlight. Argoz stiffened, her jaw tightening. What is she doing out here? Being Rose, Caleb said flatly. Evelyn folded her arms, her ember-like eyes narrowing. She's always working something. Whatever it is, it's none of our business. She's watching us, Argoz muttered, her sharp eyes locked on Rose. Of course she is, Evelyn said. That's what she does. Let's go. But even as they turned and started walking, Argoz couldn't shake the feeling of Rose's gaze following them. When she glanced back over her shoulder, Rose was still smiling, her posture relaxed as she rested her chin on her hand. She said something to the man across from her, who nodded nervously, and then she laughed, a soft, melodic sound that echoed faintly in the quiet night. The streets were quiet as the trio made their way toward their makeshift lair, a small, nondescript apartment Caleb had secured for them. The tension between them was palpable, and it was Caleb who finally broke the silence. She's going to be a problem. She's always a problem, Evelyn said, but she's also useful. That's why we deal with her. For now, Caleb said, his tone heavy with warning. He glanced at Argoz, his expression unreadable. You've got to be careful around her, Goblin. Rose doesn't do anything without a reason. I can handle myself, Argoz snapped, though her voice lacked conviction. Evelyn sighed. We're not saying you can't, but Rose has been playing this game a lot longer than you. If you're not careful, you'll end up being just another piece on her board. Argoz didn't respond, her fingers brushing against the gem beneath her cloak. She couldn't deny the pull Rose had on her, the mix of charm, danger, and the promise of answers. But something about the encounter left her uneasy, and the sight of Rose on the human side of the bar, laughing and scheming in the shadows, lingered in her mind like a ghost. The night was quiet as Argoz, Caleb, and Evelyn walked briskly back to their warehouse. The streets were mostly empty, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights and the occasional flicker of neon signs. Argoz kept glancing over her shoulder, the weight of the celestial gem pressing heavily against her chest. This city's too quiet, Argoz muttered, her sharp yellow eyes scanning the shadows. It's better that way, Caleb replied. Fewer prying eyes. Evelyn remained silent, her ember-like eyes fixed on the road ahead. But as they rounded the corner to their street, she suddenly stopped, her posture tensing. What is it? Argoz asked. Caleb's gaze followed Evelyn's, and his expression darkened. Cops? Ahead of them, the warehouse next to their own was bathed in the red and blue flashes of police lights. Squad cars lined the street, officers clustered at the perimeter. The three of them ducked into an alley, staying hidden as they watched the scene unfold. From their vantage point, they saw a group of figures emerge from the shadows, moving with quiet precision. The police officers at the perimeter stepped aside without protest, their faces etched with a mix of frustration and resignation. That's not normal, Argoz whispered. Who are they? The pack, Evelyn said grimly. Gunner's team. The ones you warned me about? Argoz asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and unease. Evelyn nodded. And now you see why. Gunner led the team, his cybernetic arm gleaming faintly in the dim light. His movements were deliberate, his presence commanding as he signaled for the others to follow. Eli trailed close behind, scanning the air with a glowing device, her expression tight with concentration. Karina unsheathed her katana, the blade catching the light with a deadly shimmer, while Darren adjusted Thunderstrike across his shoulder, his posture relaxed, but ready. What are they doing here? Argoz asked, her voice low. Something big, Caleb murmured. And dangerous. They watched as the team disappeared into the warehouse, leaving the police to hold the perimeter. The tension in the air was palpable, a sense of impending violence that made Argoz's skin prickle. Inside the warehouse, muffled sounds of movement and voices carried through the night. Then, a guttural roar shattered the stillness, echoing through the empty streets. Argoz flinched, her instincts screaming at her to run. "What the hell was that?" she hissed. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Something corrupted." As they watched, the roar was followed by the faint sound of a gunshot, then another. The warehouse windows flickered with bursts of light, and the silhouette of a man, wild and erratic, appeared briefly against the glass. "That's not human," Argoz said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. "No," Caleb agreed, "and that's why the pack is here." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the three of them watched, tension coiling in the air. Finally, the pack emerged from the warehouse, their movements swift and coordinated. They carried a man between them, his body slumped and trembling, veins pulsing with a sickly black glow. "That's the drug," Evelyn said softly, her expression grim. "It amplifies power, but it corrupts, destroys." The team moved quickly, loading the man into an unmarked vehicle at the back of the building. Darren broke off, heading toward the police sergeant who was waiting near the perimeter. "Who's that guy?" Argoz asked, nodding toward Darren. "Pack liaison," Caleb replied. "Smooth talker. He handles the humans, so they don't ask too many questions." Darren's conversation with the sergeant was brief, punctuated by the occasional gesture toward the warehouse. Whatever he said, it worked. The sergeant scowled but motioned for his officers to retreat. The three of them watched in silence as the pack finished their extraction, moving with an efficiency that was both impressive and unnerving. As the last of the vehicles pulled away, Evelyn exhaled slowly. "They've got it under control. For now." Argoz frowned, her sharp eyes lingering on the now empty warehouse. And what happens if they don't? Caleb's gaze was dark. Then everyone loses. The trio moved silently through the dark streets, the tension from the warehouse still coiled tightly around them. Argoz walked a few steps behind Evelyn and Caleb, her sharp yellow eyes flicking to every shadow, every corner, her instincts humming with unease. "What was that thing?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. "The guy with the black veins." "A victim," Evelyn replied without looking back. "Of the drug." Argoz frowned. "Victim? He didn't look like a victim. He looked like something out of a nightmare." "Nightmares don't choose you," Caleb said, his tone grim. "This drug does." Argoz opened her mouth to press further but stopped herself. Something had been nagging at her since they left the warehouse, a flicker of movement at the edge of her vision that she couldn't shake. Finally, she asked, "Did you see the guy on the perimeter?" Caleb glanced over his shoulder. "Which one?" "The one who disappeared," Argoz said. "He was there 1 second, gone the next, like he melted into the shadows." Evelyn and Caleb exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. "Shade," Evelyn said finally, her voice low, "one of Gunner's team." "What's his deal?" Argoz asked, her curiosity piqued. "Stealth," Caleb replied. "He's their scout, their infiltrator. He's different." "Different how?" Argoz pressed, her sharp instincts telling her there was more to the story. Evelyn hesitated, her ember-like eyes narrowing as she considered her words. "Shade's not like the rest of them. No cybernetic enhancements, no flashy weapons, just shadows. He moves through them like they're part of him." "He's their ghost," Caleb added. "If you see him, it's because he wants you to." Argoz's frown deepened. "And why would he want to be seen?" "To send a message," Evelyn said simply. Argoz's hand instinctively went to the celestial gem beneath her cloak, its warmth a small comfort against the growing unease in her chest. "Do you think he saw us?" Evelyn shook her head. "If Shade wanted to know we were there, we wouldn't be having this conversation." "Then why bring it up?" Caleb asked, his tone sharp. We stayed out of their way. Let's keep it that way. Argoz fell silent, but her mind churned with possibilities. The pack had seemed untouchable, their precision and discipline unmatched. But Shade, he was something else entirely, something that made her instincts bristle. The warehouse was quiet, its air filled with the faint smell of rust and damp concrete. It wasn't much, but it was safe, for now. Evelyn had claimed a corner, leaning against a stack of crates with her arms crossed, her ember-like eyes dim as she stared into the distance. Caleb had already stretched out on a makeshift cot, his breathing slow and steady as he drifted into sleep. Argoz sat on a frayed cushion in the middle of the room, her knees drawn to her chest. The celestial gem rested in her lap, its faint glow pulsing softly in the dim light. She traced her claws along its smooth surface, the shifting patterns within it both mesmerizing and maddening. Everything felt too loud in her head. The encounter with Rose, the pack's terrifying efficiency, the sight of that man twisted by the drug. It was all too much. She let out a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the gem. "What the hell am I doing?" she muttered under her breath. Evelyn's voice cut through the silence, calm but sharp. "You're surviving." Argoz flinched, glancing toward her. She hadn't realized Evelyn was still awake. "It doesn't feel like it," she admitted. Evelyn's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't move from her spot. "You're alive. That's what matters right now." Argoz scoffed, leaning back against the wall. "Barely. And for what? I've got Draven's hunters after me, a shiny rock that everyone seems to want, and no idea what the hell I'm supposed to do next." "You'll figure it out," Evelyn said simply. "Will I?" Argoz snapped, her voice rising. "I don't even know why I'm here. Why this stupid gem chose me. Why—" Her voice broke and she bit her lip, forcing herself to stop. Evelyn didn't reply, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she turned away, leaving Argoz to her thoughts. The room felt colder as the silence settled again. Argoz stared at the gem in her lap, its faint glow reflecting in her sharp yellow eyes. "You're supposed to have answers," she muttered bitterly, her fingers brushing against its surface. "So why don't you?" The gem pulsed once, almost as if responding, but no voice, no vision, no revelation came. Just the same rhythmic glow, steady and unyielding. Argoz let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through her spiky black hair. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, to find a dark hole somewhere and wait until the danger passed. But she knew better. There was no hiding from Draven, no escaping the pack, no avoiding the shadows that seemed to close in on her from every side. She glanced at Caleb, his face relaxed in sleep, and then at Evelyn, who still sat motionless in her corner. They were here. They'd helped her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still alone in this, that the weight of the gem and whatever destiny it carried was hers to bear. Her thoughts drifted back to Rose, to the diamond ring she'd flaunted and the sly smile that never quite left her face. Rose had looked at her like a puzzle, a piece on a board she was already manipulating. And then there was Shade, the shadowy figure who had disappeared as if he were never there. Who else was watching? Who else wanted her? And the gem. Argoz's claws dug into the cushion beneath her as a wave of frustration and fear washed over her. She hated this feeling, being lost, being vulnerable, being alone. She clenched her fists, her sharp nails biting into her palms. "I need a plan," she whispered to herself. "Something. Anything." But no plan came, just the hum of the gem, the slow rise and fall of Caleb's breathing, and the faint rustle of Evelyn shifting in her seat. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. Eventually Caleb stirred, rolling over with a groggy sigh, but he didn't wake. Evelyn's ember-like eyes had dimmed completely, though Argoz knew she wasn't really asleep. Argoz pulled her knees tighter to her chest, her gaze fixed on the gem as her thoughts spiraled. What if she couldn't figure it out? What if she failed? What if she'd been better off staying in Mirkdusk, letting Draven's forces catch her, ending this chase before it consumed her completely? She shook her head, trying to banish the thoughts, but they clung to her like shadows. The weight of the gem in her hands felt heavier than ever. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know if I can do this." The gem pulsed faintly, its light warm and steady against her trembling fingers. It wasn't an answer, but it was something. And for now, it would have to be enough.
Well, you found your way to the end, haven't you? That must mean you're curious, and we love curiosity around here. Before you vanish into the ether, take a moment to subscribe. It's just a click, and trust me, you'll want to stay in the loop for what comes next. And while you're at it, give the video a like. The energy exchange is good for you. Hit that notification bell too. You wouldn't want to miss out on any of our magical misadventures. Who knows what I might conjure up next? Alright, off you go. But remember, I'll know if you didn't subscribe. See you on the other side.